I think the important thing, guys, is when we talk about our history here, people need to understand that it starts really small. Like, we didn't start big. We worked forever just to try to spin up enough side hustle money, right, to be able to even invest in the stock market. And when we finally did and we started investing, we had this social R methodology and it exploded. And I'll never forget the day that I crossed $100,000 in my brokerage account. I thought I was the richest person in the world. And that day, literally the thing that went through my head was, someday I might be able to grow this to $1 million. And I was like, and it wasn't that much longer after that. It was like a year and a half after that it hit $1 million, after I hit 100K.
We've been getting a lot of questions lately about who we are, how we made it to where we are as, three unemployed dudes who talk about investing on YouTube, who somehow turned 40K into more than $40 million. Today on Dumb Money, the story of how we started investing our own money full time, why we call ourselves Dumb Money, why we're even making these videos. Our new channel, which we just came up with a name.
Is that a 6 or a B?
But we are Dumb Money.
I think it says exactly what we are.
And exactly what we did to get to this point. The good, the bad, the ugly, including a video that I made about Chris over 25 years ago about his hobby of shopping at garage sales.
And there's Chris, a 19-year-old college student majoring in business. Amongst the garage sale underworld, he's known to be the best at what he does.
It'd be nice if they let us in at 5:30. I don't think it's going to happen.
That actually foreshadowed our current stock market investing style. Chris, how long have I known you? We've been doing stuff since what? We're 14, 15 years old?
Yeah, school library, skipping lunch, talking about how we were gonna place classified ads to start selling stuff in newspapers to make little amounts of money on trading things, right? Back then, that was at age 13. Yeah. Pretty much. That's how it started. Well, here we are.
And Jordan, I met Jordan, what? Was that like the early 2000s?
Let's see. I think the first time I ever met you was at like a Kaboom Town at Len's car dealership.
That's probably right. Although I knew of you before that. I didn't.
Oh yeah, I'd heard your name like a million times.
Because we were like competitors in the weird underground world of like programming for car dealers.
I felt like we were more like strange bedfellows.
I think the important thing, guys, is when we talk about our history here, people need to understand that it starts really small. Like, we didn't start big. We started like really, really, really small. In fact, me and Dave, and I know Jordan, you were working for many, many years, but we worked forever just to try to spin up enough like side hustle money, right, to be able to even invest in the stock market. Because like, we had day jobs. We just worked normal day jobs like everybody else does.
For not just for a couple of years. We worked real jobs for like a decade.
Over a decade, yeah. Like, we worked our butts off for the man for over a decade. And the whole time we had little side things going on to try to scurry up a little bit of extra cash that we could invest in the stock market. And when we finally did and we started investing, we had this social R methodology and it exploded. And I'll never forget the day that I crossed $100,000 in my brokerage account. I thought I was the richest person in the world. And that day, literally the thing that went through my head was, someday I might be able to grow this to $1 million. And I was like, and it wasn't that much longer after that. It was like a year and a half after that it hit $1 million, after I hit 100K.
The first 100K was like a grind to get there. And then you had enough capital to actually, if you can double $1,000, that is amazing, right? But if you can double $100,000, it just gives you that much more ammunition to keep doing that.
Yeah, and when I wrote that book, Laughing at Wall Street, but when I wrote that book, I turned 20K into 2 million, and I was wondering at the time, well, am I going to be one of those guys that just burns out, right? Like, that's just like, I had the book, like I was so happy to have the book out because it was like cementing that I did something. And now maybe it was all going to fall apart. Like, can I ever take this 2 and turn it into 20, right? And like, it happened, right? Like, it literally it's happened. And now I'm at the same point going, could I turn to 200?
Yeah,
right.
And we're going to tell you some stories about, things along the way, some of these random business ideas. And you see in our little timeline, garage sales. That's a video that 25 years ago, I made following Chris around on this little thing that he would do, is just going to garage sales, buying stuff, and then selling it for more money than he paid for it, which is which sounds like something that Gary Vee is doing to this day.
We were so doing Gary Vee before Gary Vee even knew what Gary Vee was.
Just about anything can be found at garage sales. But there's more to it than the merchandise. The people who actually go to these sales make up the garage sale underworld. He prefers to wait until 7 or 8 before knocking on the door and waking the homeowner up.
They're up. They don't want us to know they're up. I guarantee you they're up.
Should we knock on the door?
Shh. We could get a good piece of furniture out of this one. Could also get some good electronics. Nice.
When did you first realize that kind of arbitrage of like buying stuff and then reselling it could turn into something that you could use for the stock market? Did you think about it in stocks first, or as like a part of this garage sale thing, and not having any idea that you'd ever use it for stock market?
I was obsessed with garage sales from even my preteen years, because it was the one thing that if you're 11 or 12, you could actually go, and when other people would go to look for toys, I would look for stuff that I was like, can I find something that someone else would pay me more money for, right? Like that was my attitude. I don't know why that clicked in my head, but that was always my attitude. And the thing I realized was that all these garage sales are controlled by women, generally older women that have deep expertise in antiques and certain types of collectibles, but they didn't have a clue or any respect for things that were male-oriented. So even male watches, railroad sets, all kinds of things that were male-oriented, they didn't know how to price, and they treated it like junk. So I would buy that type of stuff, and I would then sell it to dealers that specialize in these various things. And this is pre-eBay, of course. So if I had eBay, it would have been so much easier. I didn't, so I had to find dealers around the country that I could mail things to sell them. And I was arbitraging garage sale merchandise because it was social arb at the time, because people just didn't understand what these things were worth because they had a bias, right? And what's so funny is now that when we developed social arb investing for the stock market, that bias totally opposite. The stock market was run by older men, right? Men in New York, and they had biases, right? They know a lot about banks, maybe sometimes energy, financials. They know very little about pop culture. They know very little about consumer behavior. They know very little about what's trending in the middle of the country, right? About fashion, about things that are female oriented. So in the very beginnings of our trading, we leaned heavily towards female oriented and youth oriented trends. Not because that was the only thing we could trade, because that was the easiest stuff. That was the stuff that had the largest social arb window. Like I remember we were investing in things that Wall Street wouldn't pick up on for months, literally months after they started trending. Yeah. And Dave, do you remember, Jordan, the iPhone? I mean, just think back to the iPhone. That was like, it seems like it's a million years ago, right? The iPhone came out, and what happened, that was actually one of my biggest trades, was a big company like Apple, because in New York, they were on AT&T, and AT&T literally almost didn't work in Manhattan because of the way that their data coverage worked, like with buildings. Dave, you knew that. You went to NYU. Did you know about that?
No, it was terrible. The coverage was terrible on AT&T. You had to have Verizon if you were going to be in Manhattan.
Yeah, and so because of that, like people weren't using iPhones on Wall Street, and not to mention the fact that they were using BlackBerries because they worked for these legacy financial firms that couldn't easily switch over to an iPhone, and all these dudes on Wall Street are using their BlackBerry because that's what they got to use for free, and the whole world is ripping on the fact that the iPhone doesn't have a keyboard, right?
Yeah.
And like Wall Street just didn't understand what was happening at my townhouse party in Dallas, Texas, with a bunch of 22-year-olds.
Everyone's showing off this new device they have that is revolutionary. It changed everything about the way they communicated. And it didn't even have an app store at the time, and it was so game changing.
Yeah, I mean, and it changed the way, not just the way you interact with your phone. People were able to play games with the accelerometer that they've never been able to do before, and that was pretty early on. Pretty awesome.
Yeah.
But Jordan, no one was seeing that in the financial industry.
Totally.
They physically weren't in a place to be able to see it. They had what we call geographic bias, okay? There's demographic bias and there's geographic bias. This is one of those trades where there was a massive amount of geographic bias. And honestly, people are like, oh, I bet that methodology only works on penny stocks or small stocks. No.
The biggest.
No, it works on the biggest stock in the world. Yeah. And by the way, not just the biggest, but the most covered stock in the world. I had a whole chapter just on Apple and about all the analysts at the time and all the most prominent media journalists in the world that said that this thing could never, ever, ever, ever work. A phone without a keyboard was just for an imbecile idea, right?
Yeah. Jordan, do you remember what your first ever investment was?
Yeah, Apple.
Was it?
Was it really?
Mhm. Yeah, totally.
No way.
100%.
Huh.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
Why? Like,
100%.
like, did you open a brokerage account to invest in Apple?
Yeah. Yeah, this was before their first split, I think. Or they had that big 7-to-1 split, right? And I remember investing in them. I think it was like in the eCarlos days. We were about a year in, and I heard. I think it was because of you, Chris. I think you started talking about Apple and all these things, and I was like, you know what? I need to get on this. So I opened a TD Ameritrade account, and I bought my first. I don't even remember how many shares.
I remember you coming and talking to me at eCarlos
Yeah.
because we knew each other. We were getting to know each other pretty well. And you were talking to me about wanting to invest. And I was like, oh, this is so cool, right? I love that. I love more than anything when someone that had investing was totally off the radar. Because the thing is, Jordan, you were an entrepreneur. Like, you were an entrepreneur engineer, right? Like, so your mind thought that way. But the one thing that you were missing was just simple exposure to this world, right? I was like your exposure to it more than anything else. And I think a lot of the reason why we do this show at Dumb Money is we want to give the entire world exposure to people like us that have had tremendous success. Because unless you're exposed to this, unless you actually see this and feel it, you don't believe that it's possible, right? And so the more people we can get in front of with this show, and that's a big part of our motivation, right? Everyone asks, what's your motivation? Do you want to sell stuff to people? Do you want to come up with a trading program? Like, are you trying to, like, what are you trying to do? What's your game here? What's your purpose? I'm like, our purpose is legit to save the world, to save humanity, because I believe that, 80 to 90% of people in life are stuck working for the man, right? Yeah. And they believe that their only road in life is to work for wealth. Well, if we can convince people that you don't have to just work for wealth, that you can let your money work for you, kind of like that book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. You don't have to do it all yourself. Your money will work for you, right?
And I think,
unless you're,
I agree with that, Chris. But at the same time, you are the hardest working person I know, and that's why you've done so well, because you combine hard work with your money to then go make money, right? This doesn't just happen by accident.
And that's what I say. Chris is the hardest working, and his brain is always on. He's always thinking about like what the next trend is, what the next investment is. And this is going back to, when you were 15 years old, and we would sit around trying to brainstorm crazy little schemes of how we could make more money or whatever it is. That just goes way back in your history. But
you know what, guys? It's not mutually exclusive, and you don't have to make tens of millions of dollars. Most people aren't necessarily needing or wanting to have to make tens of millions of dollars. If they can make $1 million over 20 years, 10 or 20 years, that is a huge game changer for their life. And I truly believe that time beats effort, meaning just having your money in the market and having it sit there for a long amount of time. That is the most important thing. Now, if you can start to optimize it the way we do with social arb investing, getting social edge and picking the right stocks, well, you can accelerate that, right?
And that's always kind of
I don't think it's even making $1 million. It's saying, you know what, I'm not gonna go buy that new car this year. You know what, I'm gonna put that money and I'm gonna sock it away, I'm gonna invest it, and then when my daughter gets married or when I retire, I'll have some extra traveling money or whatever it happens to be, right? And so it's about changing your mindset about money and realizing that, the investments are probably a better place to put your money than a lot of other places.
And for me, it's always been about like working smarter and not harder. Like the whole grind mentality, the Gary Vee way of living is not for me. I love to simplify things, find the way to put in the least amount of effort and have the maximum reward from it, right? And to me, yes, I did for 10 years go and work a job that I, climbed my way up that corporate ladder at Yahoo back when it was a real company that was bigger than Google at the time. But that wasn't for me. I did it for 10 years and I learned more than anything. That was better than business school. But for me, it was more just the exposure to a way of thinking that I don't want to do this. Let me find something that I can do on my own that I can benefit from the time and effort, and then try to find ways. Now I do as little as possible, right? I've spent more time making YouTube videos than I do thinking about the stock market.
And it's so much more fun. And you know what? That touches on another topic for me. The most important thing is having risk capital. And what I mean by that is I think the biggest obstacle for most people, the number one hurdle to making that leap to having a bucket of money that's really growing rapidly like ours is, that they're not having to physically work for, is just initiating a bucket of capital in their life that is designed to put into high risk, right? And high risk could be something as simple as stocks, right? Growth stocks. On days like today, you're not worried. You don't even blink an eye that you lost 10% of your money, because that money's supposed to lose 10% every once in a while. But over the long run, it's going to make you rich. I call it in my book, I call it other people's money, because I think there's a mental block. You can't just take money that's designed for a vacation or designed for a college education
or designed even just to pay your rent or to pay your mortgage.
No.
You can't take that money and put it at risk. You have to completely segment your life into, this is my risk account and then this is my living account. And it took us a long time, decades, to get to the point where we had enough in our risk account where we could actually live off of that risk account.
Listen, Dave, I feel like we've covered like 1.5% of our history in this episode, and that's what this episode is going to be about. But like, if we cover more of it, I will be. I can start bringing stuff up from our past. We didn't even talk about our companies, eCarList, right? Ticker tags that we started and sold. We're going to have more episodes on this guy. So if you like this episode, give us a thumbs up and let us know. Like, do you like us sharing like when we were prior to having all this money, how we got there? Like, is that interesting?
And if you're still watching, we'll end this and then we'll have the replay. Go in the comment section and let us know in that kind of permanent comment that you either like this, that you want to hear more about, which company you want to hear more about, whether it's eCarList, which was our software company that Lynn and Jordan founded and Chris and I came aboard later, or Ticker Tags that they founded and that I briefly came and worked there before you sold it. And then
WikiTags.
Yes, that was going to be the big thing.
WikiTags. That was going to be the next big thing.
Let us know what you're interested in down in the comments.